All right, guys, today we are continuing our off-season content, and that means another reinstallation of our buy low, sell high series, just trying to identify some discrepancies in market value, whether it's undervalued players or players that are just really overvalued. That can hopefully you can take advantage of these discrepancies and win a fantasy championship in 2023. Now, with every yin, there's a yang. With every rise, there is a fall. With every night, there is going to be a day on the other side. And with talking about the running backs that we wanted to buy low on last week, today we're going to be talking about those running backs that you want to sell high on or just avoid in your drafts because they are significantly overvalued compared to what my perceived fantasy production is going to be in 2023. So as always, like the video, comment down below if you agree with this list and if you think these players are also overvalued. Subscribe to the channel if you're new, and I will see you on the other side of that intro. Welcome back into Twin Takes Fantasy Football. Today we're going to be following up on last week's video talking about continuing our conversation around running backs. Last week we identified running backs that we just thought were really undervalued and guys that you could get at absolutely steals of prices to help you win. These are guys that if you're in Dynasty this week, as far as running back position goes, you want to sell them. You want to get your maximum return on value right now in the offseason before the season starts because they're just not going to return on production that the market currently perceives them to have. Or if you're in redraft or best ball, just avoid them at the current ADP entirely and let someone else pick up those landmines and have them ruin their teams for 2023. Running back's always a very interesting position to talk about because the mindset around running backs in fantasy football has changed in recent years. It used to be, first round of redraft leagues, you were taking 9 of those 12 picks or 10 out of those 12 picks are always going to be running backs. You had to have a top tier running back if you wanted to win a fantasy championship. But I just think the way offensive play calling has adjusted in the NFL the past few weeks, wide receivers are more relevant. High-end tight ends like Mark Andrews and Travis Kelce are more relevant. And we've just seen the overall value of the running back position dip in recent years. I think as far as mock drafts go, I know it's still very early on, but this is the fewest number of running backs taken in the first round that we've had in over a decade. So with that being said, there are a lot of people who still have that antiquated view around the value of the perceived value of running backs. You can certainly take advantage of, and you can sell some of these guys and try to address wide receivers and more valuable fantasy assets. But with that being said, let's dive into our list of guys that you need to be selling or getting off of or just avoiding completely at the running back position. And first, we're going to talk about one of the more interesting case studies of this offseason. That's going to be Isaiah Pacheco. And I say it's interesting because he is tied to probably the best offense in the NFL currently. They were number one in offense efficiency in 2022. But that doesn't mean NFL production. And while Isaiah Pacheco is a great NFL running back, it doesn't necessarily translate to fantasy production. And as far as, Isaiah Pacheco, he's a great NFL running back. He's highly productive when it comes to what the Kansas City Chiefs are looking for him. And obviously his value is inflated because, attached to that number one ranked offense, attached to the Super Bowl winning team. And it's just assumed that there's going to be a lot of points to go around as the Kansas City Chiefs put up a lot of points. But here's why I am avoiding Isaiah Pacheco. As far as the Kansas City Chiefs offensive weapons are concerned, Isaiah Pacheco is way down in the pecking order. Obviously Travis Kelce is the number one guy there. As far as wide receivers goes, it's a massive wide receiver room. It's going to consist of Kadarius Toney, MVS, Rashee Rice, Sky Moore. And even when it comes to the running back room, last year, even with all the switching and utilization, the number one running back for the Kansas City Chiefs was Jerick McKinnon overall as far as fantasy production. And when you start looking at the first 6 games of the season, Clyde Edwards-Helaire is by far and away the number one guy utilized for the Kansas City Chiefs. So even within his own running back room, which I don't think is the strongest when it comes to position groups within the Kansas City Chiefs, Isaiah Pacheco is not the number one guy. And I think that they could genuinely move on from Isaiah Pacheco here very soon. He only has 7th round draft capital. And that when you're taking into account what that means as far as an NFL team, that 3rd day draft capital, at 7th round draft capital, doesn't mean very much to the NFL teams. We've seen guys that were very productive, like a James Robinson for the Jaguars, and they immediately go and draft his replacement the next year. And also with Clyde Edwards-Helaire contract, his contract's going to be ending this year. Rookie contract's ending after this year. Jerick McKinnon's contract is up. He signed a 2-year contract last year. This is his last year on that deal. So with those potential guys potentially both leaving Kansas City, they could look to address running back pretty highly in the upcoming 2024 draft in the offseason. A guy like Blake Corum, I think, would make a lot of sense for the Kansas City Chiefs and would immediately replace Isaiah Pacheco on the depth chart. So I just don't think Pacheco's involvement in this offense is for long, and his days are numbered. And the Kansas City Chiefs offense, why I say it's so interesting as a case study, because even though it's very dynamic and it's very efficient, it's just so diverse. Obviously, Kelsey is number one, but just the way they use all their weapons outside of Kelsey, it's just very diverse. We saw not a single wide receiver break over 1,000 yards last year. Not a single running back got over, I believe, 800 yards last year. Jerick McKinnon's going to be the pass catching work, so Isaiah Pacheco is really limited from the pass catching side. We've seen Kadarius Toney get touches out of the backfield and get some touchdowns from the running back position, which is obviously hamstringing Isaiah Pacheco. So as far as, the true volume that Isaiah Pacheco is going to get, it's just not going to be that much. And even when he was utilized down the stretch, there was really very little touchdown upside. When it gets to those goal-to-go situations, Andy Reid does love to pass. He is I believe the highest or second highest percentage of passing attempts when it comes to that inside the 5-yard mark. I mean, we've seen Kadarius Toney take those goal line touches away from Isaiah Pacheco if Patrick Mahomes is not throwing to Travis Kelce in the end zone. And even though Isaiah Pacheco's volume was utilized, especially at the running back position, quite a bit in the last 6 to 7 games last year, he only returned 4 touchdowns, which really is not what you're looking for when it comes to touchdown upside. So, no pass catching ability, no touchdown upside, and just, the very diverse use of the weapons in Kansas City means I'm trying to move off of Pacheco as soon as possible. Moving on, I know this point has been belabored, but I would be remiss as a fantasy analyst if I did not touch on Javonte Williams. I know there's been some hype around him in the offseason, being talked up by Sean Payton. People saying that, his injury, the knee, the rehab is really on track to be performing very well. I still can't get over it, and I need to address it here on this video because I still think Javonte Williams, as a prospect, you need to sell high on him. Not that he can't start this year. Obviously, he will be effective at some point this year when it comes to the running back position for the Denver Broncos, but we just look at how much time he's missed, how he's been utilized. He spent basically the majority of his prime running back years on the bench been on the IR dealing with rehabbing from this injury. And when he comes back, he's still going to be, if we're looking at hey, Javonte Williams is going to break out next year in 2024, well, he'll be 24 at that point, and he'll be entering the end of his running back lifespan. So it's just, even if he does come back and produces for 8 games this year, which people are kind of betting on, I still don't think the long-term value for Javonte Williams is going to be there. I think it's, another position where we've seen the offseason moves by the Denver Broncos. His days in Denver are numbered. But, I'll touch on this briefly here. It's been mentioned numerous points, both myself and other analysts, that the injury for me is still terrifying. Yes, I understand that the rehab process is going well, but we look at what happened with J.K. Dobbins, because that's what I kind of comp Javonte Williams' injury to. It was, not just an ACL tear. It's an ACL, a PCL, and also a slight injury of the MC as well. So there's very, very significant knee damage, and which is extremely concerning for a running back position. So while normally an ACL, we've seen players return from that in 7 to 9 months, given the extent of damage in Javonte Williams' knee, and he suffered his injury in week 4 of the 2022 season, I think it could take well over 12 months before he is even capable of touching the NFL field. I don't believe he'll be ready for week 1, and I think it's going to take some time for him to get acclimated and return to even some semblance of what he was prior to the injury, even after he is cleared to resume contact and cleared to be on the field. Obviously, with J.K. Dobbins last year, he returned, struggled a little bit, went back on the IR, got another follow-up surgery, comes back, still had some issues. He had this one wild quote where he's like, yeah, one leg is good, but I still have my slow leg. So normally this is an injury that I'm taking a very conservative approach to, and thinking maybe the time frame is more 15 to 18 months before we see Javonte Williams become an effective running back. But even outside of the injury, which is a lot of the talking points around Javonte Williams, we have to look at this Denver Broncos offense as a whole. It was abysmal in 2022. And there really wasn't much change outside of firing Nathaniel Hackett and bringing in Sean Payton. And do we really believe that Sean Payton is going to completely revolutionize this offense with one offseason? Do you think he's going to come in and increase offensive efficiency, double the offensive points that this Denver Bronco put up? I'm not that confident. I'm a little skeptical in what Sean Payton brings to this team, especially with very, very minimal offensive weapon moves or changes to the offensive system. They didn't have any draft picks from the Russell Wilson trade, so the offense looks extremely similar to what it was in 2022. Russell Wilson, there's nothing really this offseason that proves that he's going to be returned to an elite quarterback. Yes, he's slimmed down. I've seen the pictures of him putting in work, but I'm not going to buy into the hype. I'm not going to buy into the Instagram weight room warrior stuff. I'm buying into what the production he actually put up last season, and it's going to take a lot for me to believe that he can return to being an efficient quarterback after the play that he demonstrated on the field last year. And the Denver Broncos being one of the worst offenses, contrary to Kansas City, they were, I believe, bottom 5 in offensive efficiency. If Javonte Williams dealing with injury concerns is tied to that sort of offense, then I'm extremely concerned for what he can actually do as far as fantasy output. So I'm just being skeptical of the Sean Payton bump that's happening to everyone. This is the same bump that, despite no actual NFL production, everyone was really high on Courtland Sutton and Jerry Jeudy last year. And again, this year in the offseason, despite no actual NFL production, there's the bump from Sean Payton. So, and last thing I'll say about Javonte is this current regime brought in Samaje Perine, who is incredibly good at the running back position. I think he's very undervalued. We talked about him last week as an undervalued running back that I would be picking up, especially over Javonte Williams. Last year in Cincinnati, I don't know the exact numbers, but I do know as far as touches were concerned, Samaje Perine was more efficient than Joe Mixon, and Sean Payton and the brass up there in Denver brought in Samaje Perine for a reason. So I think he's going to eat quite a bit in Javonte Williams' workload. So that's all my concerns around Javonte Williams. Moving on to the third running back that I want to talk about, and it's going to be Khalil Herbert, running back for the Chicago Bears. You know where I'm going to go with this take if you've been watching my rookie mock draft videos for Dynasty, and it's because I just have a ton of faith in Roschon Johnson. I think Roschon Johnson, if he wasn't at Texas behind Bijan Robinson, would have been a top 5 running back prospect, maybe even a little bit higher. I think what he is as a pass catcher, his strength. I mean, he's got 10 pounds, 4 inches on Khalil Herbert. When it comes to absolute power at the running back position, Roschon Johnson is just physically much better than Khalil Herbert. And I don't think it's completely impossible that Roschon takes over the running back 1 position from Khalil by week 5 of the 2023 NFL season. I'm very, very high on Roschon Johnson. And obviously, with that rise in Roschon's value, it's obviously going to impact the way I view Khalil Herbert. So my opinion on Roschon is one of the reasons why I'm down on Khalil Herbert. The secondary reason is that, he's never really done it. There was so much hype coming into last season with David Montgomery still on the team that Khalil Herbert was going to take that next step, that he was going to be that goal line back, that he was going to vulture so much work from David Montgomery, and it just never materialized. David Montgomery over the past 3 years always was the workhorse in Chicago, was always the guys getting the pass catching work, getting the bulk of the touches out of the backfield, and then truthfully getting that goal line work. So I've seen this before with Khalil Herbert. He's been hyped in the offseason before in the past, and it's just never translated to fantasy production. So when you hype up a guy, and this is like the whole Gabe Davis thing last year, I can't buy into a guy that was super hyped up and then just failed to deliver because he just hasn't proven that he can be that workhorse guy or can be the alpha guy at the NFL level. And I just don't think Khalil Herbert has not the mindset, but he just doesn't have the skill set to be a true workhorse running back in the NFL. And also he's tied to a running quarterback. We know, especially Justin Fields, who frankly, below average as a passer, and does, he was basically the running back 1 for the Chicago Bears last season. He loves to take off and run. He's not going to dump off to the running backs. A lot of what Matt Eberflus did to make Justin Fields successful last year was to design a lot of running plays for him. So we obviously, historically in fantasy football, we see running backs that are tied to rushing quarterbacks. Their production declines because those goal line touchdowns vultured by the quarterback when they scramble, the dump off work, the pass catching work, it's basically non-existent because those rushing quarterbacks would rather scramble when the play breaks down rather than dump off to the quarterback or dump off to the running back. So I think Khalil Herbert, even if he does manage to somehow find a way to stave off Roschon charging to the RB1 slot, if he does find a way to, elevate himself to that workhorse running back position, his upside is going to be severely capped by what Justin Fields does in the running game as well. All right, moving on to our fourth running back in this list. It's a guy that, the conversation has been surprisingly absent this offseason, and it's going to be Josh Jacobs with the Las Vegas Raiders. Yes, we here at Twin Takes Fantasy Football are fading the number one overall running back of the 2022 season. Here's why. First off, historically, it's incredibly rare, if not non-existent, that the running back one repeats a running back one performance in consecutive years. It just doesn't happen just because there's so many variables that impact the running back position. I mean, you just look at Jonathan Taylor from 2 years ago to what he put up in the 2022 season. And unless you're a complete outlier at the position, we're looking at like a Christian McCaffrey or a Derrick Henry, then I don't think they're going to even be remotely considered in that RB1 conversation. And Josh Jacobs, to me, just doesn't have that talent or the historical production to put him up in that insane elite tier of the CMC and Derrick Henrys where, he has the ability, regardless of external factors, to put up the same production year in and year out to be running back one. And speaking of historical trends, this is a guy, that didn't really put it together until his fourth year in the league. He got that first round draft capital 4 years ago. And when you look at his ADP in year 1, 2, and 3, he was considered maybe a slight bust, definitely a disappointment for fantasy based on where the value he returned on ADP year in and year out. And it wasn't until, this past season that he really broke out and put it all together for a running back one season. And I'm not confident that if we extrapolating all 4 years, I'm going to bet on the 3 years that he was below average on the ADP rather than the 1 year that he did return value on his ADP. And also the running back position, we have to, as I mentioned in the intro, it's one of the more volatile positions. Again, in recent years, there's been a shift in the way fantasy players approach the running back position where we're seeing less and less of these running backs go in the first round. And I don't think Josh Jacobs, based on where he's ranked currently, is going to be a guy that is going to return value as a first round ADP running back. There's a lot more wide receivers I'd rather have over Josh Jacobs. We're talking about CD Lamb, AJ Brown, Stephon Diggs, guys that are going around the end of the first round, early second round, that I'm taking without hesitation over Josh Jacobs. And frankly, I'm concerned that he is on the Las Vegas Raiders. We know historically that teams that are, below average in production, the general suckiness of a team is most correlative to the fantasy production of a running back, just because, they are at the mercy of the offensive line. They are at the mercy of game script. And I do believe that being in a stacked AFC West, Josh Jacobs is going to have a very, very difficult time, along with the entire Raiders organization as a whole, putting up wins, putting up points. And like I said, the underproduction of the Raiders as a whole is going to correlate mostly with Josh Jacobs not getting touches, not getting the same utilization he did this past year. And last thing is, he was franchise tagged this season, but he still hasn't signed his franchise tag. There is no guarantee that he's going to play this year. Yes, overwhelming probability is that, he signs the franchise tag, he plays, or he does sign some sort of deal that lets him return to the Raiders this season. But, he was drafted by the John Gruden administration when it comes to the Raiders. Josh McDaniels has no loyalty to Josh Jacobs, and this is a guy that, could be cast off the Raiders organizations sooner rather than later, especially if he isn't willing to agree to a new deal or sign the franchise tag. I don't think there's any sort of production as far as a long-term deal in place for Josh Jacobs and the Raiders, so I'd be willing to move off of him sooner rather than later before it all comes crashing down for the fantasy value of Josh Jacobs in this next offseason. Moving forward to the fifth running back. We can do this. Typing. Yep, there we go. Aaron Jones, running back of the Green Bay Packers. And it's, again, similar to the Raiders organization. A lot of organizational uncertainty is going to be impacting Aaron Jones. First off, let's just look at this number right here. He's on his age 28 season, which, listen, younger than me, so I can't really say too much about it, but it's basically ancient when it comes to a running back position. And especially after this year, I know he restructured his deal, thought he would come back, but the overwhelming possibility is that Aaron Jones is cut by the Green Bay Packers this coming off season, and his fantasy value just dives off of a cliff. I'm of the Bill Belichick mindset that even though Aaron Jones might be incredibly productive this year, we see as these rookie, quote unquote, rookie quarterbacks. Obviously, Jordan Love is not a rookie, but this is going to be his first season starting the NFL. Matt LaFleur is an offensive-minded guy. He's competent at developing offenses and going to create an offense that is going to be, more beneficial to Jordan Love than just trying to throw him into the fire and having him figure out, which is going to mean a lot of reliance on the running back position, a lot of reliance on short passes and screen passes to Aaron Jones. So yes, while Aaron Jones might be incredibly productive this year, and with his current ADP, I believe he's going somewhere in the 4th round of redrafts. Definitely targeting him in redraft because that ADP is good. As far as Dynasty goes, I am willing to move off of him a year before the entire bag just comes crashing down. He'll be kind of like next year in 2024 offseason. Just look at Ezekiel Elliott this past offseason. A guy that the 2022 offseason for Ezekiel Elliott, exactly what I'm looking at with Aaron Jones. A lot of people are saying move off of him. He has one more year of relevance. It could have a high upside, but everything after this year, he could not even be on a team following this 2023 season. So despite the upside that I see, the mild upside that he has for this season, just with his age, with the Packers organization, with how I see them moving on and moving forward with Jordan Love, I am really, really advocating to get out on Aaron Jones now while he still has some value left. And that's not to say that he's a bad player at all. It's just truly looking at the value of Aaron Jones. Moving on to our next running back, it's going to be James Cook, a guy that a lot of people are high on. I don't really understand why. James Cook, we talk about the undersized running backs and how we are so adverse to them. Well, look at James Cook. There is so much concern around Jahmyr Gibbs coming into this offseason. A guy that didn't hit 200 pounds, a guy that was undersized at our running back position. Well, James Cook, he's 190. He's not that 200-pound running back that we like to see. And I don't understand why the undersized running back conversation applied to Jahmyr Gibbs, but doesn't apply to James Cook, especially as I think Jahmyr Gibbs is more talented in the pass catching ability than James Cook is. So James Cook, he's just not a run between the tackles kind of guy. He's not, yes, he's explosive. He can get outside. He's really effective in the screen pass game. But as far as a touchdown upside, when you get to that goal line position, Josh Allen, the true running back one of the Buffalo Bills, he's going to be taking that touchdown upside. I just don't see any sort of modicum of touchdown upside for James Cook. And as far as total volume, when it comes to running between the tackles and getting touches out of the backfield, I think it's incredibly limited with the size and skill set of James Cook. Also, let's just look at the running back production of the Buffalo Bills as a whole. The past 3 years, the running backs for the Buffalo Bills have put up fantasy finishes, and this is in totality, of 31, 31, and 30 out of 32. That does not instill confidence of the running back position as a whole for the Buffalo Bills. And a lot of this does, go to the fact that they have a bunch of incredible pass catching weapons, starting with Stephon Diggs. They invested into Dawson Knox this offseason and believe they're going to bring him in as a pass catcher. They do have Josh Allen, who truly is the running back one of that offense. So I just believe a lot of that is going to hamper the total volume that James Cook sees, including the lack of upside when it comes to, the goal line and touchdown work. Also, the confidence and the moves that we've seen Buffalo make, not only last season, but this offseason, the conversation around the Buffalo Bills just doesn't instill confidence as James Cook being the guy going forward. Yes, they invested a second round draft capital in him, but that doesn't really mean that he's there for the long haul. They traded for Nyheim Hines halfway through the season to be a backup. I'm not sure why you make that trade if you're not totally invested in James Cook being the guy that can step up behind Devin Singletary. And also this past offseason, there is so much conversation around, hey, listen, if Jahmyr Gibbs is there at the end of the first round, Buffalo is probably a team that takes a shot on Jahmyr Gibbs. Listen, they were linked to, with all the analysts. I personally didn't think Bijan Robinson was going to fall to the end of the first round, but you had a lot of, the statistical analysis and the positional value guys saying, you don't take Bijan to the end of the first, and one of the places they could see him falling would be the Buffalo Bills. There's just been way too much talk, the trade with Nyheim Hines, the talk about them drafting another running back, potentially adding another running back. They did add
Damian Harris in the offseason. Just none of that instills confidence in James Cook as a true volume play at the running back position. And they still could, they're linked to add Dalvin Cook, James Cook's brother, who I think is more talented than James Cook. So, well, before that happens, before they add yet another running back, James Cook is a guy that I think, is going to be fantasy irrelevant sooner rather than later. And while he still has that, allure of being a young running back, try to move off of him and get value for him as soon as possible. Now, that being said, we have a trio of players to talk about to finish out this video. We're going from James Cook to Dalvin Cook. This is what I call the Dalvin, and Joe conundrum. Talking here about Dalvin Cook, Alvin Kamara, and Joe Mixon. First off, let's just address the fact that all three of them had significantly decreased production in 2022. All three of them are entering either age 27 or 28 season. So they're, again, well, I can't really say much because they are younger than me, but they're basically ancient when it comes to the running back position and the age range we see at that position. And there's been insane rumors swirling with each respective team about them moving on. Dalvin Cook is the first of the dominoes to fall. He was a post-June 1st cut for the Vikings. And, the fact that it's been, almost 2 weeks and he hasn't been picked up or signed a new deal is incredibly concerning for the way that teams value running backs right now and are very trepidatious to adding some of these veteran running backs. We see Ezekiel Elliott having not signed a deal for over 2 months. And while Joe Mixon and Alvin Kamara are still on teams as of this point, I could see both of those two teams moving on from their respective players here very, very soon as we approach the end of June and into early July. Both Alvin and Joe have severe legal issues, and as we talked about with their contracts per the NFLPA agreement and the collective bargaining agreement, there is clauses in each contract where the team can terminate the contract at clause with no penalty due to charges being filed against them. And there's also rumors around Joe Mixon being cut even regardless of the legal issues. And they're going to try to put the monetary squeeze on him. It's just not a contract that I think the Bengals can't afford right now as they look forward to the future to trying to pay Joe Burrow and Jamar Chase and potentially even trying to pay T. Higgins as well. The contract of Joe Mixon is incredibly bloated. And the Saints, on the other hand, have invested significantly into the running back position this offseason. They brought in Jamal Williams, who's not a spring chicken in and of himself, but, with this team, with this offensive, or with the coaching staff there in New Orleans, bringing him in as another option, seems that they're trying to transition away from the workhorse that was Alvin Kamara. And they also drafted on day 2 Kendre Miller, who I think is an incredibly talented running back. So a lot of these things, I know these have been fantasy giants the past few years. These are guys that were year in and year out first round fantasy picks, guys that, had maybe taken you to a championship 2 or 3 years ago, part of this golden era of the running back position for fantasy. But there is a time for whom the bell tolls. Father Time comes for everyone. And I think that these trio of guys, it's time to move on. If you're in a dynasty league, these are guys that, if you get a second round pick for them, I'm extremely happy. I'd be willing to move on, even if I am a competing team, just because there's value that you can flip the second round pick for, or you can flip them for. That's going to have more immediate impact in the 2023 season. And if Dalvin Cook doesn't get signed, if Joe Mixon doesn't get signed, if Alvin Kamara is suspended, we didn't even talk about Alvin Kamara's suspension. If they're not even on a team or if they're on a bench, they can't score fantasy points for you. So, the best ability is availability, and these guys might not be available for seeing the field at all in the 2023 season, at least for a small part of it. So, these are guys that are beloved in the fantasy community. They have been stalwarts of the running back position, but, this is where the curtain finally closes. These are guys that, not picking up in a redraft, not picking up in best ball unless they're falling to like the 7th, 8th round, which, they won't because of name value alone. But if we're going to identify true production going forward, these are just guys that you're not going to return value whatsoever. I mean, I could sit here and talk for another 15 minutes about all the concerns that I have around the Dalvin, Alvin, and Joe conundrum, but I think I wrapped it up pretty good there. All right, so that's going to wrap up our conversation around overvalued running backs. I gave you 9 running backs for the price of 7, talking about the Dalvin and Joe conundrum there at the end, roping them all in together, because I think it's basically the same conversation for all 3 of them. But these are guys that, when you're on the clock, you may be tempted by the name value, or maybe have an emotional attachment to them winning you a fantasy championship eons ago, or maybe you invested a very early on in James Cook or some of the younger running backs. But these are guys that I just don't think are going to really return that value where they're currently set at with their ADP. And I'm a huge proponent when you see these guys when you're on the clock, when you see these guys on the draft board, try to pivot elsewhere. Really look at the wide receivers available. Maybe look at the running backs that we said buy low on, take them reach a little bit on them. But my personal opinion, especially with the way that the offensive play scheme of the NFL has moved forward in recent years, transition to a more pass-heavy game, especially some of these guys that are in the first round, like a Josh Jacobs. I'm really looking for wide receivers to take ahead of them, who I think will be more impactful for fantasy 2023 going forward. So hope you guys enjoyed. Let me know what your thoughts are on these running backs down below, whether you agree or disagree. I know this is a little bit more of a long-winded episode, but we could talk about running backs for days. So I'll wrap it up. Hope you guys enjoyed. We still have tight ends and quarterbacks to get through the next couple weeks, so stay tuned for those. And as always, take care.